This story is a fictional work created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, and events are entirely fictional. I remember the exact moment my world tilted and the room spun out of focus. It happened at what should have been the happiest celebration of my pregnancy, the gender reveal party Ethan and I hosted at the Maplewood Community Center in Columbus, Ohio. The tables were covered with pastel decorations, the cake sat perfectly in the center, and the people I loved most gathered around us smiling as if nothing in life could be wrong. For a few minutes, I believed it too. Then Melissa arrived. My sister stepped through the doors late as usual, dressed as if she were attending a spotlight event instead of my party. She carried a tray with a wide smile, announcing that she had baked something special just for me. I knew she had never cooked anything in her life, but everyone stared expectantly, and I did not want to create tension, so I took the slice she offered. The frosting looked fine, but the taste was slightly metallic. I swallowed anyway because my mother was watching me with that look that meant do not embarrass the family. Within minutes, the edges of my vision flickered. My heart thudded unevenly as if it were struggling to keep pace. A soft ringing filled my ears and the pastel colors of the room blurred together. Guests thought I was overwhelmed by emotion, but when I glanced at Melissa, she was not concerned. Her eyes held something else. Something cold. Something satisfied. My knees buckled and the floor rushed toward me. Ethan caught me halfway down, shouting my name, while others gasped. I felt hands on my shoulders, voices echoing above me, and then the distant sound of someone calling emergency services. By the time the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, my chest felt tight and every breath scraped. In the ambulance, I heard a medic murmur to another that this did not look like simple fainting. At the hospital, Dr. Karen Schultz studied my vitals and said the words that have haunted me ever since. Whatever she ate was not safe for her body. I stared at the remaining piece of cake on the napkin beside me and knew exactly who had placed it in my hand. This was no accident. This was betrayal, and I would not allow the person responsible to walk away from it. The moment my body gave out felt unreal, as if I were watching someone else collapse, while the voices around me grew sharper and more distorted. My legs trembled first, then a sudden heaviness spread through my arms and chest, as if gravity had tripled without warning. I tried to speak to tell Ethan something was wrong, but my tongue felt thick and my lips barely moved. The pastel decorations blurred into streaks of blue and pink, and the room tilted hard to one side. I heard my mother gasp behind me, followed by her familiar dismissive tone. "She is just emotional. Pregnancy does that to women." My father snorted as if my body failing was some personal inconvenience to him. "Hannah has always been weak. She cannot handle big moments." Their words stung even while my vision dimmed and my heartbeat pounded off rhythm like a drum losing its pattern. Through the haze, I searched for Melissa and found her standing several feet away. She made no effort to come closer. Her arms were crossed and her face unreadable except for something sharp in her eyes that sent a chill through me. Ethan knelt beside me, gripping my hand firmly. "Something is wrong. This is not normal," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice cracked with fear, a sound I had never heard from him before. As I struggled to breathe, he turned toward the small crowd forming around us. "Someone call emergency services. Now!" My mother waved a hand dismissively. "She does not need an ambulance. She needs to calm herself." But Ethan ignored her, pulling out his phone, while Rachel pressed a cold cloth to my forehead, whispering to stay with her. When the EMTs arrived, they examined my pulse, then exchanged a look I did not miss. "Her heart rate is unstable," one muttered. "Has she eaten anything unusual?" Ethan stared at Melissa for a split second before answering. "She had a slice of cake." "That one." His voice tightened. "Please check everything." My mother huffed as if the attention offended her. "Do not start pointing fingers." But the EMTs were already loading me onto the stretcher, their movements quick and efficient. During the ride to Riverside Methodist Hospital, I drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing fragments of concern from the medic beside me. "This does not look like simple fainting. Her vitals are off." At the ER, bright lights washed over me as Dr. Karen Schultz examined the monitor above my bed. She looked at Ethan, then at me, her eyes narrowing with concern. "We need blood work immediately. Something in her system is not normal." Growing up in Akron, Ohio felt like living inside a house with two different climates. One side warm and full of soft sunlight reserved entirely for Melissa, and the other cold and shadowed where I learned to keep quiet, move fast, and never expect much. From my earliest memories, Melissa was treated like something fragile and precious, a glass ornament everyone admired but handled with care. On her birthdays, the living room would overflow with ribbons, cakes stacked high, and gifts wrapped in shiny paper. I remember watching her twirl in her new ballet shoes while relatives clapped proudly. My birthdays were smaller affairs, usually just dinner at home, and one practical gift, like shoes for school. When I asked my mother once why my celebrations were different, she smiled in that tired, patient way that meant she considered the conversation over before it began. "Melissa needs more than you do. You are the strong one. You must understand that." And I nodded because I had learned the rule early. Do not question the imbalance. Accept it gracefully. My father enforced the lesson in his own harsher style. He demanded perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect composure from me, while brushing off every one of Melissa's failures with a chuckle. "She is spirited," he would say, as if that excused broken rules or tantrums that lasted all evening. When Melissa refused chores, I was told to pick up the slack because I was responsible. When she broke my science project the night before a fair, my father scolded me instead, insisting I should have known better than to leave it where she could touch it. I think the moment I first understood the depth of the divide came when Melissa enrolled in ballet lessons. She had shown interest for only a week. Yet my parents rushed to buy the outfit, pay for the studio, and celebrate her every tiny accomplishment. I loved drawing more than anything and begged to attend an art class at the community center, but my father dismissed it as unnecessary. "You can practice at home, Hannah. Do not expect us to spend money on every whim." The message was clear. Melissa was to be nurtured, lifted, and admired, while I was expected to carry the weight of reason, responsibility, and silence. With each passing year, the pattern deepened, shaping Melissa into someone who believed attention was owed to her, and shaping me into someone who believed I had no right to ask for anything at all. Leaving Akron for Columbus felt like stepping into a world where the air finally moved freely. I enrolled in a nursing program at Columbus State, and for the first time in my life, I lived in an apartment where no one compared me to Melissa, or reminded me of what I owed the family. My days were packed with lectures, clinical rotations, and late-night study sessions, but the exhaustion felt clean. It was mine. During my second year, I met Ethan, who was volunteering at the hospital where I trained. He was steady in a way I had never known. He listened without interrupting, and when I hesitated to talk about my family, he never pushed. Our relationship grew slowly until one day I realized he had become the first person who made me feel seen without conditions. I built a small, independent life and I protected it fiercely. Melissa, meanwhile, drifted from job to job as if employment were a temporary hobby. One month she worked at a boutique, then quit because the manager was too demanding. The next month she tried real estate, then dropped out of the licensing course halfway. She cycled through boyfriends just as quickly, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and wounded pride. Every time she fell apart, my parents called me with the familiar expectation in their voices. "Hannah, she needs help. She is going through a hard time. You are the stable one. Send her a little money to keep her afloat." At first, I did. $20 here, $50 there. I told myself it was temporary, that she would eventually find her footing, but the requests grew more frequent and more entitled. One evening after a 12-hour clinical shift, my mother called in tears, demanding that I cover part of Melissa's rent because they could not bear to see her struggle. When I said I did not have the money, my father snapped, telling me not to be selfish. The old pressure tightened around my ribs just like when I was a child. The more independent I became, the more my parents tried to pull me back into the role they had assigned me. As I watched Melissa repeat the same patterns of chaos enabled by the same excuses I had heard my whole life, I felt a familiar unease creep into my new world. No matter how far I moved, the family dynamic I thought I had escaped was finding ways to follow me. I told my parents about the pregnancy on a quiet Sunday afternoon in February when the snow outside had finally begun to melt. Ethan and I had rehearsed what to say, hoping it would be a joyful moment. When we shared the news, my mother gasped with delight, and my father actually smiled, a rare expression that softened the lines on his face. "Our first grandchild," he said, as if the idea belonged to him. For a brief second, I allowed myself to feel the warmth I had always wanted from them. Then Melissa walked into the room. She stared at the ultrasound photo Ethan held out and shrugged as if he were showing her a receipt. Not a single congratulations, not even a forced smile. She simply dropped onto the couch, pulled out her phone, and began scrolling noisily. I tried to ignore it until she spoke without looking up. "Kids ruin your body, you know. Hope Ethan does not run off when you start gaining weight." Her tone was light, almost playful, but her eyes flicked toward me with unmistakable intent. My mother shot her a warning look but said nothing. My father chuckled as if Melissa had told a harmless joke. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, sensing the tension. I tried to steady my breath. This was supposed to be a happy moment, yet it felt painfully familiar. Later that evening, I called Rachel, who listened quietly while I recounted every detail. When I repeated the comments Melissa had made, she exhaled slowly, the way she did when choosing her words carefully. "Hannah, she is not handling the spotlight being on you. You know how she gets when she thinks attention is slipping away." Rachel had always been blunt about my family, and often she saw things I did not want to acknowledge. Over the next few weeks, Melissa grew noticeably sharper. She made remarks about my appearance, about how young mothers never get their careers back on track, about how some women lose their husbands once the baby comes. Each phrase wrapped in a smile and delivered as if she were offering advice rather than venom. Even at family dinners, she would mention the pregnancy, only to shift attention back to herself, claiming stress or exhaustion, or a new crisis that demanded immediate sympathy. My parents tended to her with practiced devotion, barely noticing how quiet I had become. As my belly grew, so did the uneasy feeling that something in Melissa had shifted. Her resentment was no longer subtle. It was simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for a moment to spill over. Planning the gender reveal should have been a lighthearted escape from the steady stream of pointed remarks Melissa had been making, but even the preparations carried an unease I tried too hard to ignore. My mother insisted we hold the event at the Maplewood Community Center, claiming it was spacious, bright, and conveniently close to Melissa's apartment. She repeated that last detail several times in a tone that dared me to argue. I gave in because confronting her always felt like stepping into quicksand. Ethan raised an eyebrow when he heard the plan. "Why does it matter where she lives?" he asked quietly, but he let it go when he saw how tired I was. A week later, during a family meeting to finalize decorations, Melissa announced that she wanted to make the cake. The room fell silent. No one in the Pierce family had ever seen her bake anything beyond boxed brownies that she usually burnt. Still, my mother clapped her hands together as if Melissa had offered a generous gift. "That is wonderful, dear. Hannah will love it." Ethan met my eyes with a look I recognized instantly, concern mixed with frustration. Later at home, he asked gently if I was sure I wanted to accept Melissa's offer. "She has never baked a full cake before, Hannah. What if it turns out badly?" I laughed it off, even though the same thought had crossed my mind. "It is just a cake. It will be fine." I did not want to seem paranoid, not after weeks of tension. The morning of the event, we arrived early to help set up. Pink and blue streamers hung from the ceiling, and tables were arranged neatly with pastel plates and small vases of flowers. Guests trickled in carrying gifts and warm smiles. Everything looked perfect from a distance. But small things began to unsettle me. At least 2 guests mentioned they had seen Melissa whispering intensely with my mother outside the entrance before the party began. One of them joked that they looked like they were plotting a secret mission. When I looked toward the corner of the room, I saw Melissa standing with her back to us, her shoulders stiff, her hands moving quickly as she adjusted something on the cake table. When she noticed me watching, she gave me a too bright smile. I pushed down the familiar pinch of doubt. Today is supposed to be happy, I reminded myself. Red flags were fluttering all around me, but I chose to look away because the alternative meant questioning my own family again. When the time came to cut the cake, Melissa hurried to the front with a flourish as if she were the guest of honor instead of me. She lifted the knife, dramatically sliced through the frosting, and carved out a piece from the very center. Then she turned toward me with a fixed smile that did not reach her eyes. "This one is for you." "Hannah, I made it especially for you." The way she emphasized the word especially made something in my stomach tighten. I tried to wave it off gently. "I will take a smaller slice. I feel a little full already." But my mother stepped forward, clucking her tongue as if I were being rude. "Do not refuse her effort. She baked this with her whole heart. Show some appreciation." My father nodded in agreement, folding his arms as if daring me to decline again. Guests were watching, smiling politely, unaware of the silent pressure closing in around me. Ethan shifted beside me, looking uneasy, but he did not want to escalate the moment. Reluctantly, I accepted the slice. Melissa handed it to me with both hands, her fingers lingering a second too long on the plate. The frosting looked smooth, but the texture seemed slightly uneven, almost grainy when the fork pressed into it. I lifted the bite to my lips, telling myself I was imagining things. The first taste was sweet, but not in a natural way. It coated my tongue with a heavy syrupy layer that felt oddly warm. As I swallowed, a faint metallic aftertaste crept up the back of my throat, sharp enough to make me blink. Rachel, who stood nearby, tilted her head, watching me closely. "Is it good, Hannah?" I forced a smile. "It is fine. Maybe a little too sweet." Melissa clasped her hands dramatically, as if waiting for applause. "I made that part of the cake with extra care," she said. "Only for you." Her eyes locked onto mine in a way that made the hairs on my arms lift. I took another small bite, mostly because everyone was still looking. The strange flavor deepened the metallic note, lingering longer this time, almost bitter. A thin thread of nausea twisted through my stomach. Ethan leaned in, whispering softly, "Are you sure you are okay? You do not have to finish it." Before I could answer, my mother interjected loudly, "Let her enjoy it. The cake is lovely." Pressure wrapped around me again, and I swallowed one more bite to end the spectacle. I set the plate down, hoping no one noticed my hand trembling. Something about that slice felt wrong, but I pushed the thought away because questioning it meant confronting a truth I was not yet ready to face. The strange taste lingered longer than it should have, and within minutes a wave of dizziness rolled over me so sharply that I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The room shifted in slow, heavy circles, and the laughter around me faded into muffled echoes. I tried to call out to Ethan, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. A cold sweat broke across my skin. My heartbeat thudded loudly, then skipped in a way that made my chest tighten. I took one unsteady step, and the floor rose toward me in a violent tilt. Gasps erupted. My knees buckled, and I fell forward, but Ethan lunged just in time, catching me before I hit the ground. "Hannah, stay with me! Stay with me!" he pleaded, his voice tight with fear. Before he could lift me, Melissa shouted from behind him, her tone sharp and cutting through the chaos. "She is faking. She always needs attention." Several guests snapped their heads toward her, startled by the accusation, but Melissa crossed her arms as if she had presented an undeniable truth. Ethan ignored her, completely cradling me as if every second mattered. My vision dimmed around the edges, and each breath felt too shallow. Rachel crouched beside me, gripping my hand, whispering that help was coming. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, assessing my pulse, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. One of them exchanged a troubled glance with the other. "Her vitals are unstable. We need to get her to the ER immediately." Melissa scoffed loudly, but no one paid attention to her anymore. The world blurred into streaks of color as they lifted me onto the stretcher. Ethan climbed into the ambulance beside me, holding my hand as if letting go would break something irreversible. At Riverside Methodist Hospital, bright lights flashed above me while nurses rushed to attach monitors and start an IV. Dr. Karen Schultz entered with a calm but urgent presence. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, while her eyes focused on the erratic rhythm displayed on the screen. Ethan explained everything: the cake, the sudden dizziness, the collapse. Dr. Schultz listened carefully, then nodded to the nurse. "Draw blood and run a toxicology panel now." Minutes later, she returned with a tightened expression. "The results show traces of a substance that can cause rapid drops in blood pressure and trigger irregular heart rhythms. It is not lethal in small amounts, but extremely dangerous for someone pregnant." She looked at me quietly before speaking again. Whatever you ate was not safe for your body. My stomach clenched. I knew immediately which bite had done this. My parents arrived at the hospital just after midnight, their expressions tight with a mix of irritation and forced concern. Instead of rushing to my bedside, my mother marched straight toward Ethan as if he were the source of the disruption. "What is all this talk about something in the cake?" she demanded in a hushed, scolding voice. "Do not start pointing fingers. You will embarrass the family." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. Embarrass the family. Hannah collapsed. She could have lost consciousness completely. My father interjected before Ethan could say more, lowering his voice but sharpening it with warning. "Do not accuse Melissa without proof. She is devastated right now hearing what you are insinuating." He said, devastated, as if Melissa were the true victim in the chaos she had stirred. Melissa entered a moment later, her makeup perfectly intact, her expression carefully arranged into a mixture of shock and wounded innocence. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I cannot believe anyone would think I did something to my own sister." She sounded rehearsed. Her eyes flicked toward me only briefly before she looked away, as if the sight of me in a hospital bed was too painful for her delicate sensibilities. My mother rushed to Melissa's side, embracing her as though she were the one who had collapsed. "This is why you must not say anything that could be misinterpreted," she said, turning back to me with a stern look. "People talk. Neighbors gossip. We need to protect our reputation." A bitter heaviness spread through my chest. Even lying in a hospital bed hooked to monitors, my safety came second to the image they wanted to maintain. My father leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant to sound fatherly. "Hannah, you have always been dramatic. Perhaps the stress of pregnancy made everything feel worse. Mentioning your sister's name right now will only cause trouble." I heard the gaslighting clearly this time. It was the same tactic they had used all my life. I stared at Melissa, who dabbed fake tears from the corners of her eyes while avoiding direct eye contact. The realization settled cold and sharp. They were not here to understand what happened. They were here to control the narrative. My voice shook as I spoke. "I know what I felt. I know something was wrong." My father sighed heavily, as if my insistence were an inconvenience. "Please do not drag the family through a scandal." That was the moment the second betrayal hit harder than the first. Not only had something been done to me, but the people who were supposed to protect me were demanding my silence. Rachel arrived just as my parents were circling closer, tightening their attempts to contain the situation as if my collapse were an inconvenience rather than a warning. She stepped into the room with a determined stride, her eyes immediately scanning my face before shifting sharply toward my mother and father. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with steel. My mother straightened defensively, smoothing her blouse. "This is a family matter. We do not need outsiders stirring panic." Rachel did not even blink. "If you continue trying to cover this up, we will report it to the police." The room went still. My father stiffened his jaw, clenching as if she had insulted him personally. "You have no right to interfere, young lady." But Rachel held her ground. "I have every right when my friend almost lost consciousness in front of me and everyone is pretending it was nothing." Her voice cracked slightly from emotion, but her resolve only hardened. "Something was off tonight, and you both know it." Melissa, who had been lingering near the door, let out a shaky laugh. "You cannot possibly think I had anything to do with this. I brought that cake out of kindness." Rachel turned her gaze on her slowly, deliberately, until Melissa's forced smile faltered. "I saw you, Melissa, before the cake cutting. You walked into the hallway carrying a small container, a white plastic one. You tucked it behind your purse when you noticed me coming." My heart lurched. I had not heard this part before. Melissa's eyes widened, then narrowed into a defensive glare. "That is ridiculous. You are imagining things." Rachel shook her head firmly. "No, I know what I saw. And if Hannah had eaten any more of that slice, Dr. Schultz already said it could have been far worse." My mother stepped between them, raising her hands as if keeping order in a courtroom. "Enough. We will not accuse your sister based on fantasies." The air in the room tightened like a drawn string. But Rachel did not back down. She moved to my bedside, placing a hand on the railing. Hannah has a right to the truth. And if you will not help her, then I will. She turned to Ethan. We need to call the police, now. For the first time since the collapse, the pressure around my chest eased slightly. Someone was finally speaking for me, refusing to let the truth slip away under the weight of family shame. My parents stared at Rachel, stunned and furious, but powerless to stop the shift that had just begun. Early the next morning, while I slept under observation, Ethan stepped out to make a call, then returned with a determined look that told me something had shifted again. He sat beside me, took my hand gently, and said he had contacted the Maplewood Community Center to ask if their event room had security cameras. They did, and the staff agreed to let him review the footage because of the medical emergency. My parents immediately bristled when he mentioned it. My father snapped that it was unnecessary, and my mother muttered that digging through cameras would only make us look paranoid, but Ethan ignored them. When Rachel arrived, he played the footage on his phone. The image was grainy, but clear enough to show the cake table from an overhead angle. Melissa walked into the frame about 20 minutes before the gender reveal started. She looked around quickly, then reached into her purse and brought out a small object. In the poor lighting, it was hard to tell exactly what it was, but her movements were unmistakably deliberate. She leaned over the cake and seemed to apply something to the section she later cut for me. My breath caught. Even though the footage lacked sharp detail, the posture, the secrecy, the precision of her actions all pointed toward intent. Rachel leaned closer, squinting. That is the container I saw. I know it is. Ethan paused the video and zoomed in, but the resolution blurred the edges too much. You can see she is doing something, he said. It may not be perfect proof, but it is enough for reasonable suspicion. Melissa, who had been quiet in the corner, let out a forced laugh that cracked slightly. This means nothing. I was fixing the frosting. It looked uneven. Anyone can see that. Rachel turned to her sharply. You were alone at the table. No one else touched that cake before Hannah did. My mother stepped forward, shaking her head. This is circumstantial. People adjust frosting all the time. We cannot accuse her based on shadows and guesses. But I could see something flicker across my father's face. Doubt, or maybe fear, of what it would mean if this was real. The weight of the truth pressed against the room. Even the weak hospital lights seemed to dim under it. Ethan locked eyes with me, his tone steady. Hannah, this is enough to take to the police. You are not imagining what happened. You are not overreacting. There is something real here. The reassurance steadied me. For the first time since the collapse, I felt the ground beneath me begin to hold. Detective Aaron Collins arrived at the hospital shortly after noon, a tall, composed man with a calm presence that contrasted sharply with the tension brewing in the room. He introduced himself politely, then asked everyone except Ethan and Rachel to step outside while he spoke with me. My parents protested immediately. There is no need for police involvement. My mother insisted, gripping her purse strap tightly. We can handle this within the family. Detective Collins raised an eyebrow. A woman experienced a medical emergency caused by an unknown substance. That is not a family matter. That is a criminal investigation. Their objections crumbled under his steady tone, but I could hear them whispering heatedly just outside the doorway. When the room finally quieted, the detective sat beside my bed and asked me to recount everything from the moment the cake was served to the moment I collapsed. His questions were precise but never harsh. Did the slice taste unusual? Did anyone pressure you to eat it? Did Melissa interact with the cake before the event? I answered, carefully describing the strange texture, the metallic aftertaste, the way Melissa insisted I take that exact piece. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Ethan. You mentioned security footage. Ethan played the clip again while the detective leaned forward, analyzing every frame. His expression remained neutral, but not dismissive. He paused the video at the moment Melissa bent over the cake. Hard to tell what she is doing, but it warrants further examination. He stood and motioned to an officer waiting in the hallway. Collect what remains of the cake and send it to the lab for toxicology. My mother burst back into the room before the officer could leave, clutching her hands together desperately. Please, detective, do not blow this out of proportion. Melissa would never hurt her sister. Accusations like this can ruin a family. Detective Collins regarded her calmly. Ma'am, someone added a substance to a cake that caused significant medical distress. We need to determine how and why. Melissa pushed in behind her eyes red, but her posture oddly defensive. Hannah is overreacting. She has always envied me. Maybe she got overwhelmed and now she wants to blame me. The words hit harder than she intended because she said them too quickly as if rehearsed. Rachel took a step forward. She is not blaming you. Evidence is pointing toward you. Melissa scoffed, folding her arms. This is absurd. You all want me to be the villain. Detective Collins raised a hand, stopping the argument. The lab results will speak for themselves. No one here gets to decide the truth. His steady voice cut through the chaos, and for the first time, Melissa's confidence flickered. My parents insisted on a family meeting 2 days later, claiming we needed to talk things through before rumors spread. I knew what they really meant. They wanted control. They wanted silence. The gathering took place in their living room in Akron, the same room where Melissa's birthday parties once sparkled with gifts while mine blended into the wallpaper. Melissa arrived overdressed in a bright outfit that clashed with the somber mood, as if she intended to reclaim the spotlight. She took one look at me and immediately launched her attack. So, are you going to tell everyone how you are accusing me of trying to harm you? Her voice dripped with false outrage. Or will you keep pretending you are the victim in everything? My mother nodded vigorously as if Melissa were presenting a closing argument. Hannah, you owe your sister an apology. This has gone too far. My father crossed his arms, waiting for me to crumble the way I always had. But Ethan stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of me. Actually, there is something everyone needs to see. He connected his phone to the television, and the grainy footage from the community center filled the screen. The room fell silent. Melissa's face appeared bending over the cake, clearly adding something to the frosting, even if the details were blurred. Melissa threw up her hands. This proves nothing. I was fixing the decoration. You all know the camera quality is terrible. Before she could continue, Rachel stepped forward, holding her phone. And this is the photo I took when I saw you hiding that small container before the cake cutting. The image was not perfect, but Melissa's posture was unmistakable. It caught her mid-motion, tucking something behind her purse. Melissa's face paled, and she opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then the front door opened, and Detective Collins walked in with composed authority. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but this concerns everyone here. The entire room stiffened. He held a folder in his hand. The toxicology report came back. The cake contained a restricted substance that can cause severe drops in blood pressure and irregular heart rhythms. It is not something that appears in food by accident. A single sentence hung in the air with suffocating weight. It could not have been in that cake unless someone put it there. Every pair of eyes slowly shifted toward Melissa. My mother's hand dropped from her chest. My father's expression cracked. In that moment, the truth stood center stage, undeniable and unforgiving. For a long, suspended moment, Melissa stood frozen, as if the words from Detective Collins had struck her physically. Then her expression twisted, and the unraveling began. First came denial, sharp and frantic. That report is wrong, she shouted, her voice cracking. Those labs make mistakes all the time. You cannot trust some random test. She turned toward my parents as if they were lifelines. Tell them I would never do something like this. My mother looked lost, but still tried to salvage her version of reality. Maybe there is another explanation. Maybe the cake mix was contaminated. Detective Collins shook his head. This was not in the mix, it was added afterward. Melissa's eyes darted wildly. Then she shifted to attack. You always trust Hannah over me. She has been dramatic since childhood. She wants everyone to think I am the problem. Her voice grew louder, almost shrill. She loves attention. She always has. Ethan stepped beside me, steady and silent like a wall she could not knock down. Rachel crossed her arms, refusing to let Melissa's words take root. The evidence is against you, Melissa. Stop pretending. Melissa's face reddened. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Then came the next phase blame, slinging in every direction. If anyone is responsible, it is Mom. She told me to help with the cake. Maybe she messed something up. Or maybe Rachel put something in it because she hates me. You all want me to look like a monster." Her accusations spiraled until they made no sense at all. My father's voice finally broke through her panic. "Melissa, stop." The firm tone he used on me my entire childhood cracked something in her. She stared at him stunned, as if she had never expected him to use it on her. Then, everything inside her crumbled. Her knees bent slightly and her hands covered her face as she burst into tears, the sound raw and jarring in the quiet room. "You do not understand," she sobbed. Her voice shook with something jagged and bruised. "You have always loved her more. All of you. Always her. Never me." I stood still, stunned by the confession. Not because it was true, but because it revealed a resentment that had lived inside her for years, feeding on itself, growing unchecked. This was not an apology. It was an admission of motive, an admission that envy had taken root so deeply it had warped her sense of reality. Public humiliation spread across her as the family watched in stunned silence, and for the first time the persona of the golden child cracked wide open. Detective Collins allowed Melissa a moment to collect herself, but not enough time to twist the story again. When her sobs quieted, he opened the folder he carried and spoke with the calm precision of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Based on the toxicology report witness statements and the security footage, we are proceeding with charges." His voice did not rise yet, it sliced through the room. "Under Ohio law, this falls under reckless endangerment and food tampering. Both are serious offenses." A sharp gasp escaped my mother as if someone had struck her. My father's face drained of color. Melissa stared at the detective wide-eyed, her tears halting mid-breath. She shook her head weakly. "Charges? You cannot be serious. It was just a mistake. I did not mean for anything to happen." Detective Collins did not flinch. "Intent will be determined in court, but the act itself created significant risk to a pregnant woman. That is enough for criminal liability." Melissa rose to her feet, trembling. "You cannot do this to me." She looked around frantically as if searching for someone to pull her from the consequences closing in. Then her gaze landed on our parents, and she reached toward them like a child seeking rescue. Tell him this should stay in the family." My parents seemed torn between their instinct to protect her and the shock of hearing the words spoken aloud by a law officer rather than by me. My mother stumbled forward first, clutching my arm with desperate fingers. "Hannah, please. Do not let this go further. Families have disagreements. Mistakes happen. We can fix this quietly." My father nodded anxiously. "Your sister is going through a difficult time. If you push these charges, you will destroy what is left of our family." Their pleas washed over me like cold water. Even now, even after everything, their priority was not my safety, not my child, not the truth. It was the image of a united family held together by silence and sacrifice, my silence and my sacrifice. Ethan stepped closer, placing a steady hand on my back as if reminding me I was no longer a child trapped under their expectations. Rachel's eyes met mine, full of certainty and a silent question. Did I want to step back into the old role, or finally break free? I turned to my parents and spoke quietly but firmly. I did not destroy this family. I merely survived what someone in this family chose to do. Their stunned silence was the clearest confirmation of all. 3 days after the charges were filed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. For a second, I considered ignoring it until I noticed the shaky punctuation, the uneven spacing habits Melissa had always had when she typed too quickly. Guy, please answer. I need help." Then another message came almost immediately. "I need money for bail. Please. You are the only one who can do this." My stomach tightened, but not with guilt, with disbelief. After everything, after the hospital, the investigation, the public humiliation, she still assumed I would rescue her. I put the phone down without responding, but the calls began soon after. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was already trembling, as if rehearsed through tears. "Hannah, your sister is in a terrible situation. She needs help with bail, and we cannot afford it. You know how hard this is on all of us." I closed my eyes, letting the familiar script wash over me, the same rhythm of obligation they had used my entire life. And then came the line she always saved for last. Please, help her. One last time. Something inside me finally snapped, but not with anger, with clarity. I spoke slowly so there could be no misunderstanding. I have helped her my entire life. I have helped until it hurt me, until it put me in danger, until it nearly harmed my child. My mother sucked in a breath as if I had struck her. But she is your sister. Family is family. That word no longer had the weight she thought it did. Not after the cake, not after the collapse, not after the lies and manipulation. I kept my voice even. This time, I choose myself. I choose my safety and my child. I will not pay her bail. A long, stunned silence stretched between us until my mother spoke again, her voice small and shaking. If you do this, people will talk. Our family will never recover. I looked toward Ethan, who was assembling a crib in the corner of our bedroom, humming softly to keep me calm. For the first time, I felt the solid truth beneath my feet. Let them talk, I said. Our family broke a long time ago. My mother whispered my name once, then hung up, leaving the air strangely quiet, but I did not feel alone. I felt free. The court hearing took place on a crisp morning in late March when winter had finally loosened its grip on Ohio. I sat beside Ethan and Rachel in the small courtroom, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Melissa entered with her attorney, her expression a strange mix of defiance and fear. She avoided looking at me as she took her seat at the defense table. When the judge called the case, Detective Collins stepped forward first, presenting the findings from the toxicology report and the footage from the community center. He explained each detail methodically, showing how the substance found in the cake could not have been present without deliberate action. Melissa's attorney objected to the interpretation, but the judge overruled him. Then Dr. Karen Schultz took the stand. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, describing my symptoms, the dangerous drop in blood pressure, and the irregular heart rhythms recorded when I arrived at the hospital. She explained how the substance posed a significant risk to pregnant women and how prompt treatment had prevented far more serious consequences. I watched the judge's face as she spoke. His expression tightened with each medical detail. Melissa shifted in her seat, clasping her hands together tightly, as if trying to hold herself in place. When it was time for Melissa to respond, her attorney whispered to her for several minutes. She nodded stiffly, her jaw clenched. Then she stood and faced the judge, her voice quivering. I want to enter a plea. I did not mean to cause harm. I was under stress and I acted without thinking. Her statement was not an apology. It was a strategy. By admitting partial responsibility, she hoped to avoid a more severe penalty. The judge considered her words, then delivered his ruling. Given the evidence and your admission, you will receive probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. This will remain on your criminal record. Melissa swayed slightly as if the words hit her physically. My parents, seated in the back row, dropped their heads in dismay. The sentence was lighter than the maximum possible, but heavy enough to mark her life permanently. As court adjourned, Melissa finally glanced at me. Her eyes filled with resentment rather than remorse, as if I had done this to her. But I felt no guilt. The truth had spoken for itself. The consequences were hers to carry now. And for the first time in years, the weight was no longer on me. 2 months after the court hearing, Ethan and I moved into a small but bright house in Dublin, Ohio, a quiet suburb with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. The air felt different here, calmer, as if the tension from Akron could not follow us past the city limits. We painted the nursery together, choosing a soft sage color that made the room feel peaceful even before furniture filled it. Every stroke of the brush felt like reclaiming a part of my life that had been shaped for too long by other people's expectations. My parents tried calling once more, leaving a message that said simply, "We hope you reconsider," but I did not return the call. Melissa did not try again after her sentencing. For the first time in my life, the silence felt like protection rather than abandonment. No contact was not an act of anger, it was survival. It was creating space where my child would never grow up hearing the kinds of words that shaped my childhood. It was removing myself from a cycle that had nearly cost me my health and possibly more. Ethan supported every decision without hesitation. He attended therapy sessions with me where I slowly began to understand how deeply childhood roles had seeped into adulthood. My therapist helped me unravel the old narratives that had convinced me I owed endless forgiveness to people who offered none in return. She reminded me that boundaries were not walls, but doors I could choose to open or close. For the first time, I chose to close them. I spent my afternoons walking through our quiet neighborhood, feeling my strength return little by little. Sometimes I would pause beneath a budding tree, placing a hand on my belly and breathing deeply. There was something grounding about knowing our child would enter a world not shaped by the chaos I had endured. Rachel visited often, bringing tiny gifts and a fierce devotion that reminded me what real love looked like. One evening, she handed me a small framed print that read, "You get to decide who has access to you." I placed it on the nursery shelf. In Dublin, our days were simple but full. Ethan made dinner while I folded baby clothes. We talked about the future, not with fear, but with hope. The life I was building no longer revolved around managing someone else's storms. It was built on intention, on peace, on the belief that my child deserved safety, and so did I. For the first time, I felt the boundaries inside me settle firmly into place, and it felt like healing. Looking back now, I understand something I once feared admitting, even to myself. Family does not excuse harm. Blood means nothing without love. For years, I let the word family bind me to people who used it as a shield to avoid accountability, who expected my silence as proof of loyalty and my suffering as part of the bargain. But becoming a mother changed everything. It forced me to see clearly what I could no longer justify or overlook. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent to protect the image of a family? Or would you have chosen safety, truth, and a future built on respect? As the weeks passed after Melissa's sentencing, I found myself thinking often about how many people live through similar patterns of gaslighting, control, and pressure to keep the peace at any cost. If you have ever experienced that kind of manipulation, I hope you know you are not alone. I hope you comment and share your story because speaking it aloud is how the cycle finally breaks. Sometimes choosing yourself is portrayed as betrayal, but in reality, it is survival. When the world tells you to forgive endlessly, even when forgiveness puts you in danger, I hope you remember my story. I hope you remember that setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is courage. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this one's that expose hidden harm and remind others of their worth, please like this video so the message can reach someone who needs it. My journey is not finished. Healing is not a straight line. Some days I still hear echoes of the past and wonder how different my life might have been if someone had spoken truth sooner. But then I feel my child kick or see Ethan smiling at me from across the room, and I know without question that choosing myself was the first step toward choosing them. If you want to follow the next chapter of this justice journey, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the stories to come. There is more to uncover, more to rebuild, and more victories waiting on the other side of courage. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, then ask yourself one last question. What would you do if you were Hannah?